What they did have, and I think what their family businesses may have somewhat of an advantage with is that work ethic.
Yeah.
And the willingness to roll the sleeves up. And like you were saying, Ryan, there might be failure within that, but it's the willingness to bounce back quite quickly, roll the sleeves up again, and here we go again. We'll make it work this time.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Growth Trust podcast series. In today's podcast, we focus on regional South Australia and its impact on the South Australian economy. In this podcast, we'll look at ways to breathe new life into regional economies. From the earliest days, the regions have been fundamental to the success of Australia. Over time, regional industries have expanded to include agriculture, timber, steel production, wine, citrus, wild catch fisheries, aquaculture. The list goes on and on. This Growth Trust podcast series focuses on the issues facing many small and medium enterprises that play such an important role in the Australian economy, and there are many in the regions. In fact, the latest figures show small businesses contributed more than $500 billion to the local economy, equivalent to a third of the nation's GDP. This Growth Trust podcast is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Business Growth, which was established by the University of South Australia almost a decade ago. Today we're chatting with Emma Daly, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at Shaik's Biogrow, a company based in Mount Gambier with a fascinating story. And with me in the studio, the Director of the Australian Centre for Business Growth, Ryan Williams, who's recently written an in-daily column focusing on the need for regional economies to diversify. Well, Emma, first to you. Tell us about the Biogrow story and how the Shaik family built such a prominent company in regional South Australia.
Yeah, so it started with my grandfather Hans and grandma Marianne. They started initially in earth moving, but in doing so noticed the timber mill industry were burning off their byproduct and or sending it to landfill. He, having migrated here from the Netherlands, where their waste management systems are quite established, saw the opportunity to actually take that waste product and convert it into eventually a growing media.
And what are we talking about? What sort of byproduct are we talking about?
So offcuts, so wood chip from the radiator pine in the Green Triangle region, which is well known for its quality product that it produces. We actually were paid to take away that waste product initially because it would cause a problem for the timber mills, cause bottlenecks and frustration for them. So he took away that problem, got paid to do so. But eventually, as Biogrow became more established or Shaik Organic Soils became more established, the timber mills sort of cottoned on and thought, he's making a buck out of this. So then they actually started to charge Biogrow for the product.
So he has a vested interest in working out another way to value add in some way.
Yes, and he saw the value add through more or less the large-scale production nursery industry. Mm-hmm. So using that organic matter, converting it into a growing media. And
what are we talking about there? What sorts of? So if we were trying to visualise what this product's being used for, your dad picks this stuff up. You've got the grader, he collects it.
Yep.
Then he's going to use it in what way?
So he's going to use it it goes through a process. So it goes through a screening process. There's some additives that get thrown in. So it's a composting process. Mm-hmm. Then out the end of that process is this really nice, deep, rich-looking, dark growing media product from the pine, from the chip, and that's then sold out into large-scale nurseries to grow, all sorts of plants, all varieties. But in addition to that, would go back into the forestry industry to grow the next lot of forestry seedlings. Mm-hmm. So always a bit circular in that sense. Yep.
And your father had seen this in Holland, had he? That you said
grandfather,
that they were he was a bit more advanced in terms of...
Not necessarily the end market piece, but certainly the practice of maximising use, I guess, of your waste streams. Mm.
having travelled through Holland, I know what you mean. It's quite remarkable the way in which you see everything being used.
Yes.
And every available bit of space being used and reused again and again. So that really stuck with him.
That really stuck with him, yes. Yep. And he used those sustainability principles to innovate in quite a fruitful region, really, from a radiata pine point of view. Yep.
And this is a classic case then when we look at what today's podcast really is about, zeroing in on this notion of making the most of the region's natural advantages. And Biogrow certainly done that, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, yeah.
And that's the sort of thing, Ryan, that, you want to talk about, I know, this notion of regions maximising their opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's probably, if I take a step back and I reflect on having worked with entrepreneurs across many different domains and certainly across a wide chunk of Australia, some of the best entrepreneurs that I meet are those that come out of regions. Certainly, I'd say, pound for pound, probably the most resourceful folks that I've met over time. And I think that's because there's a lack of access to resources in some cases. And so there's kind of well, I'll give it a crack because, I've got to find a way to solve for whatever the challenge is. B, I think that in those smaller communities, there's an awful lot more support for entrepreneurs. And so probably, and again, I'm generalizing, but probably a little more tolerance for risk and failure, because the community will have your back. The community doesn't want to see people not be successful. Whereas in larger city domains, it's kind of, well, if you're not going to get on with it, oops. And we don't have a great tolerance for failure as a culture in Australia, I think, compared to some other markets internationally where failure is worn as a badge of pride. I think about Google incentivize in Google X, their Moonshots program. They actually pay incentives and bonuses on failure as opposed to on success, because they figure we'd rather know that a project has an Achilles heel on day 3 as opposed to on day 3,000 when we already have many millions of dollars into the project. And so if you spot a fatal flaw in whatever it is that we're doing, we'd rather reward you for that now. So I think in regions there's more tolerance, I would suggest. And I mean, I'd be interested, these are my observations, I'd be interested to see whether that resonates, Emma.
I think it's also relationships. When you're operating or establishing yourself within a community, you do have access to relationships that you might not have if you're in a CBD or a more dense sort of area in terms of population. So that's quite nice. And I think, that certainly rung true to Biogrow, because you'd pick up the phone and say, John, can you help me out today? I've got, this problem. I need to get that solved. And so there was this doing it together sense from a community point of view.
When people talk about in early stage entrepreneurship in the startup sector and so on, people talk about the ecosystem. I think that regions are really great examples of what a well-functioning ecosystem looks like. Yeah. Because it's defined.
And is there a sense that, you're a small community and there is that sense that we back each other up?
Absolutely.
If I'm going to buy a product, I might as well buy it from this crowd down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. Local first. And again, that we circle back to today, and that's so important today in sustainability principles, is support your local first.
So how did the family manage the growth of this business? Because obviously it's pretty big now. It started with, a very small family-operated business.
Backyard, yeah.
And I dare say, I don't know, but the family participants didn't have MBAs at the time and all that sort of stuff.
Not.
So they're learning on the job.
No, but what they did have, and I think what their family businesses may have somewhat of an advantage with is that work ethic.
Yeah.
And the willingness to roll the sleeves up. And like you were saying, Ryan, there might be failure within that, but it's the willingness to bounce back quite quickly, roll the sleeves up again, and here we go again. We'll make it work this time. So there is that. I think that rings very true to both my grandfather and my dad. Their work ethic is second to none.
I can imagine. Yeah. But we are looking at a time in South Australian history now where there are some big issues looming for the regions. And I think of, what's happening in Whyalla, what's happening with Port Pirie, with Neostar. I know, Ryan, you've written a piece in Daily looking at this notion of how we grow businesses in the regions and how we kind of think outside the square a bit, because, I mean, you look at the Iron Triangle, it's had fundamental industries that have been pivotal, steel making, smelting, etc. Your article, you look at the possibility of thinking of other industries that could grow the regional pie.
Yeah, I think somebody in government here chatted to me about how would you think about, or do you have any thoughts around what regional diversification looks like? And I think that's the same as the way you'd look at diversification in a business problem, in a single organization, where so many folks, when they're told to think about diversification or innovating into something new or whatever, chase off looking for rainbows and fairy tales and stuff that's so far removed from their day-to-day expertise. And then they fail and they go, oh, you see, this innovation stuff doesn't work. It's kind of, yeah, because you can't go from being a manufacturer of this table to suddenly, or the automotive industry.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are a few things that exist in between those 2 points.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to think about, well, what are the near adjacencies that kind of make sense for a business to look at? And so I think in regions, it's a similar kind of conversation. And so what I'd said back to the person I was having the conversation with here is, I don't know that I'd be absolutely over the long term, how do we take Green Triangle industry and how do we take the expertise that's in the Upper Spencer Gulf and start to think about diversifying those? That's a long-term game. In the short term, because we have these fabulous entrepreneurs in these communities, well, what happens if we just put them together in a room? And I think you're going to find, in the same way as within community, you get a whole bunch of industries that sort of become self-referential or build off of each other, as Biogrow's done. I think it'd be really interesting to watch what happens when you put a broad range of, let's say, timber-experienced entrepreneurs in the same room as a bunch of entrepreneurs who've grown up out of steel making and smelting. And, what are the complementarities? One of those might well be products for the housing industry, because I'm a simple guy, but, metal and timber broadly is what goes into a house, plus glass.
So you could be looking at modular construction.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that might be one of the outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think the natural process to let these fabulous entrepreneurs just have the conversations and work it out, because they probably would.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody from the outside should come in and declare, oh, I reckon this is where you should be going. I think that should be an organic process, because
an environment.
Because if the community's committed, and in the same way as you talk about being able to pick up the phone, it's exactly that conversation, but just with 800 kilometres between it.
Absolutely.
I think it's ludicrous in a country this large that we pack a whole bunch of stuff onto containers and ship it overseas, thousands of kilometres, and then buy it back slightly beneficiated, and yet we think, I don't know what the distance is, but is it 900 kilometres between Mount Gambier and Whyalla, maybe something like that?
Yeah.
I think it's ludicrous that we'd view several thousand kilometres offshore as a simpler process than connecting something that's 900 k's apart domestically.
Does the community ever organise that sort of get together? It's sort of a gathering of entrepreneurs, so that you can toss around ideas of expanding the regional economy?
I think pockets of.
Yeah.
I don't think right now there's anything I could hand on heart say that we do. So I think it's more so just in the know with the right people within community.
Does Biogrow have plans to diversify even further?
Yeah, so we almost already have. So we're in the next stage of that really, is, we started off with, the timber mill byproduct, but we now also take food organics and garden organics, and we've been doing that now for about five or so years.
Yeah, from homes.
Yes, from homes, so from council. And we are converting that into compost, which is going back out into agriculture largely, or large-scale rehabilitation projects, so mines and things like that, to rehabilitate those. Also,
mines within the limestone coast area?
No. So this will be right up through to, so we have a site in Newbridge, Bendigo, just outside of Bendigo.
Yeah.
and also Dandenong South. So there's this nice sort of logistical triangle where we can help out in that sense.
So how did you find out about that? Like, you were talking before about these connections. That's not that far. One thing that's always struck me. One thing that's always struck me about the southeast is that when I've gone down there to do stories, it is very closely aligned to Victoria. If anything, it feels a bit more Victorian than it feels South Australian.
It can do, yeah. We sit very neatly in between, really, Adelaide and Melbourne.
So that green triangle thing gives you access to some of these other regions. So how did that come about, knowing that these mines needed rehabilitating and
I think it's just through years and years of relationships and knowing industry. But we have been selling into the Vic market for many, many, many years now. So those relationships are established. And I think that, with this large push on, sustainability and improving our environment, the sort of natural inquiries have come through as well. Obviously being an organic product that fits a purpose.
So this is the sort of thing that you were touching upon, Ryan, in the piece you wrote for Emma Daly about how regions need to sometimes think beyond what they've been doing and think of other connections and the possibility of other industries that could grow as a result.
Yep. I mean, that's a beautiful case study or example of, I think about, I'm full of kind of probably very glib short sentences. One of them would be, there are only 3 ways to grow the fiscal performance of a business, and only 3. That's more money from same customers, money from new customers, or lower costs. The third one, the lower cost bucket, only buys you runway for at best a couple of years before you start cutting into bone and muscle and not just trimming fat.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example of, here's a capability set and a product mix that we take out, and finding a whole new customer stream outside of ag and into mining to say, well, actually, there's a project where ultimately, yes, it's about replanting and revegetation and so on in these environments, but who would have thought of a mine as a potential customer? So that's money from a new customer using your same core competency. So I'd say when you think about those adjacencies, here's a natural kind of customer adjacency that has a need for the same stuff that you produce.
I think that, you mentioned earlier, Biogrow has grown significantly. How have we achieved that? We do have a really good diverse range of end markets. So where one is dropping off, we can pick up the other and so forth. We also sell a lot of packaged products, so third-party manufacturer to some of Australia's leading home garden brands. And so that goes into Bunnings, etc., and other retail stores. So that is another volume shifter for the business. In terms of, I always talk about dynamic equilibrium being really important, what's coming in and being processed and what's going out is really important. So it's important from a recovery point of view in terms of, I guess, ascertaining those key contracts, community relationships, etc., come into play there. Our established processes and ability to diversify from a production point of view, and then those established end markets that we have and new markets as well, which help pull through that, I guess, Dad doesn't like the word waste, but waste product through the sites. Yeah.
But I take it there's been a method to all of this. It is something that you map out, you plan, you look at your markets, you think, how can we grow that? Because you mentioned diversifying is one thing, but you've got to know to diversify to what?
Yeah.
And you've got to, and obviously with the mining sector, you saw an opportunity out there through contacts and connections, but you must be thinking holistically, around all your different markets. Think, how do we, as you say, what do you call it, dynamic equilibrium?
Yes. Yep.
To maintain this dynamic equilibrium, you've got to be looking at all those markets and seeing how you can add to them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you might have one base product that you can tweak slightly that fits a whole range of end markets. From our point of view. So we're quite lucky in a sense that we are quite, I guess, nimble, and the ability to think divergently, I think, as well. But it's also not, they're not markets that are really far apart. They're similar in a way.
Yep.
And so it's sort of just building on those.
Yeah. Hence Ryan's analogy,
exist.
you can't go from the table to the car industry.
Absolutely not.
You've got to have connections.
But you think about just the level of resilience that programs into the business. So we go back to the regional diversification piece. What's the purpose for doing that? Well, you don't diversify just because you woke up today and went, oh, I know. Yeah. I think I want to do different stuff. You kind of, the reason to do that is to create more resilience in that economic environment, because ultimately that leads to more sustainable employment. And, as we've discussed in other podcasts, I'm a firm believer that people that have productive employment, whether that's in commercial enterprise or not-for-profits or whatever it is, generally lead happier lives because they feel productive in their society.
Yep.
So having that dynamic equilibrium or a greater spread of customers that you can deal with, or potentially slightly variant products that can serve a range of different customer needs, programs more resilience in if the sector's down, that sector's up, and so on. Right. And that ultimately creates a more sustainable platform to build the business off of.
Have you, I dare say it hasn't been all a straight line of success relentlessly, has it? So there have been some areas where you diversified and they fell away and decided that wasn't a marriage for us?
Look, I think a couple of examples might be, there's again with the push on other businesses finding solutions for their waste product and not just going to landfill. Mm-hmm. We like to frame ourselves as the organic solution provider. Mm-hmm. Sometimes those waste products from other businesses we trial. You can't
find a market for them,
and can't find a market. So there's definitely trial and error, but I think what we do well is we're willing to have a go.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I looked through your company's story, and what I found, Emma, the company has always looked to diversify its products against popular opinion at the time. Hans van Shaik set out testing and trialling products derived from forest residues. He then expanded the product range into soil conditioners and mulching mediums. Yep. You can explain what some of these things are, but that's the sort of example we're talking about, aren't we? Just constantly looking at how can I find another market for this and resolve a problem for someone else? Yeah.
I think an enormous amount of curiosity comes into it, an exploration from Par's point of view. We used to refer to him as the bush scientist.
Yeah, really?
He didn't have a science degree, but he would always be in the lab trialling and testing different sort of mediums, I guess.
So he'd be wandering around the forest, taking stuff back, thinking, what can we do with this?
Yeah, and speaking with people, and I guess through his experience through Earthworks, he got to know, I guess, the lay of the land quite well as well.
Yeah.
I'd frame up there's and again, in another podcast, we've spoken about the importance of being customer-centric. I think a lot of that innovation piece, entrepreneurs transition from being product or service focused and to understanding what a customer values. Mm-hmm. That's what they pay for.
Yeah.
Functionally,
they pay for it to work too. So I think, that's been really key for us is that we've been able to develop products that work.
Yeah.
And so there's a reliability in that sense. You can structure your business around reliability, I think.
And that would talk to another need that particular customer has. So they may value the reliability more so than they would the novelty or whatever. Different customers will have different buying parameters. I often use also a car analogy in that space to say, look, if I'm driving whatever the cheapest vehicle is that's on the road today, on one end of the spectrum, and on the other hand, I've a Lamborghini something or other. Mm-hmm. They're both going to get you to the same destination. They both have four wheels and a steering wheel and whatever. Airline's another good example. We all queue at the same gate to climb onto the same tube that hurtles through space to land somewhere where we all get off at the same time, but somebody's prepared to pay 4 times the price to sit up front. Why? And that's because that individual values something different. Maybe it's the flat bed or being rested because they've got an important meeting the next morning or whatever.
Yeah.
But, understanding what a customer values is what creates that market opportunity. And if reliability is that, or it may be in some cases, I'm presuming you'd probably educate me, but there'd be some customers who would be buying products from you just because it's the sort of circular economy piece
It definitely comes into it. It's a lovely story. I think it's also, because of our, industry leadership and experience, the quality or fit for purpose product is really important. So because contamination does come into play within our industry, it is what it is. But, you have to imagine from a large scale production nursery, they have little needles where their seeds are going into little pot plants in terms of potting up. And so if there's a large piece of bark or rock or something like that in their growing media, that's going to stuff up their whole production for the day. So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
Yeah.
So that quality of the premium growing media or custom blending that we do is really critical to that nursery being able to produce its next season of plantation. Yeah.
One thing I have noticed, I agree with you, Ryan, when I've travelled around the regions, the Riverland is a classic case in point. It always struck me as a region that has done it tough. It hasn't had all the natural advantages of other regions, but there's an incredible resilience in the community and a can-do approach that says, we're not going to rely on Adelaide to resolve this issue for us. We've got to do it ourselves. So they're always kind of thinking outside the square to find another industry that they can grow. And I think of a classic example that I saw a little while back that I did a story on, a walk through the Riverland. Intuitively, you don't necessarily think of the Riverland as the classic sort of tourism walking environment. But when you go from a houseboat to walking through a wetland, through a native forest, all of these sorts of things, that local person has had a passion for their region and decided that we can make something of this, and it's a very premium product.
Yeah.
So it's a classic case in point about they have this capacity to see what's there and find the market.
Yeah.
There's probably too long a story for today, but there's another example of somebody I know up in the Riverland area, Loxton, who their family were grape growers for many, many, many years. And with all of the choppiness that's came out of the COVID period and international tariffs on wine products exiting country and those sorts of things that had created so much pressure in the wine sector more broadly and then downstream for grape growers, they'd pivoted a whole bunch of their operation over to other forms of ag that are going gangbusters well. And they're looking at sort of other businesses struggling around them, and they said, well, we're okay.
That's a realistic pivot though, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Pivoting to something totally different.
But you're using your capability set, right? Because
absolutely.
I know how to manage plants and estates.
This is our existing capability. Can we apply it here or
100%
here?
right.
And what does that then look like or translate into?
Well, Biogrow doesn't necessarily need to pivot. You're doing very, very well.
Well, we pivot a fair bit actually.
Yeah, okay. So where are you pivoting to next?
We are largely looking at the ag sector. Look, we always have, but we have this beautiful compost product derived from more of our commercial green waste, I suppose. And
where does that come from? What sort
council? So that's council. So taking in community waste, let's say, and then converting that into a really nice compost, which has a lot of nutrient benefit back out onto land, crops, etc.
So farms. Okay, and that's
farms.
That's a new industry that's growing. Well,
it's not necessarily new, but it's becoming more established.
Right.
I think with the next generation of farmer coming through, they're much more open to trialling a different method. Yeah.
So how does your company? I mean, you're now 4 decades old.
Yes.
Several generations now.
3. Sorry.
3. Yep. Constantly adapting.
Yep.
Does Pa still, is there still, a great overwatch, or is it now handed over to you to take it to the next level?
Well, Pa actually passed away 5 years ago now, almost. So Dad at large, Dad, he's really been with the business since day dot, 40 years. So he's very much grown with the business. He's managing director at the moment. He plays a very strong role in leading the business.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a point of transition. So, that's exciting, I think. There's an additional, new way of thinking that's coming into the business.
Mhm.
So it'll be fascinating to see what that evolves into eventually.
So we get an idea of the growth within a regional business. It started with basically 2 people?
More or less.
Really?
More or less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To how many now?
We are 220 strong.
Wow.
Yeah.
And diversifying and growing.
Diversifying and growing. Yeah.
So you are a classic example of the case study that, you know, we're looking at the ways to find new markets in a regional economy, to grow it with all the jobs that entail and the economic growth for that region.
Absolutely. And there's a wide range of skill sets that are required within that as well.
And a big learning curve.
And a big learning curve.
At the risk of being a little cheeky, I mean, another example of a fantastic 40-year overnight success, right?
Yes.
There's so many of them around, as it turns out. You know, it's one of those, was it Thomas Edison that said that most opportunities missed because it comes dressed in overalls and looks like bloody hard work? Something along those lines, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
That rings very true.
But as a classic case in point. So, it has been wonderful speaking to you about the Biogrow story, and long may it continue.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your company today. If you'd like more information about the issues raised in this podcast or other related topics, please visit our website at www.centreforbusinessgrowth.com. And a quick reminder that you can always tune into the Growth Trust podcast on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Bye for now.